Welcome to DeadManTalkings. Come with me as we step into the deep, dark forest of fear, and let us pray we see sunrise in the morning. As ever, please do let us know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share, it really does help build the channel and our community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Fighting for My Life on the Black River. Let's get straight into that. It can't happen to me. We've all thought it at some point in our lives. We see something on the news, something terrible, a terrible tragedy, and think to ourselves, not me. That could never happen to me. Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but it can. Mine wasn't a news report, though I have thought it then too. But while watching some scary movies, a creature feature. It wasn't the usual way of thinking, the phrase though. I didn't think such things could happen to me because of my life. It was too boring for such things. I thought I'd never have something so exciting happen. Oh, how I wish I could take it all back. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself so you kind of understand my mindset at the time. I was in my early 30s, single, overweight, had constant car trouble. I worked a job I hated and lived with my mother. I struggled with depression and a severe lack of interest in things I normally loved. Yes, I frequently had those kind of thoughts, but never acted on them. I wasn't in a hurry to kick it, but living was becoming exhausting. After a year and a half of barely any downtime from work, I managed to find someone to take my place for a week so I could go on a vacation. A trip to the deep woods, as it were. I've always loved the outdoors, though I don't get out as much as I'd like, and consider myself kind of a lazy outdoorsman. By that I mean, I rarely camp more than 1 or 2 nights at a time, and I haven't been on many long hikes. Most of this is due to my size. I'm a big guy, and years of bad habit, popping my knees when they get stiff, have cut my long distance or rough terrain walks even more. However, I don't let it completely stop me, and I made plans for this camping trip on some land to which I can neither give the exact location to nor tell the names of my connections for privacy's sake. What I will say is that it is in the mid-southeastern part of North Carolina on the Black River in a densely wooded area. It had been some time since my last camping trip. Work had been stressful and I just needed to get away for a while, and though it was hunting season, I wasn't hunting. This was purely a camping trip with some hiking and fishing. That being said, I'm not dumb enough to go deep into the woods without a weapon. I was taking my AR-15, my Beretta M9 and a Mosin Nagant, to which I had some surplus steel core rounds, again, not for hunting but maybe some target shooting once I was away from the usual hunting areas, so not to spook off the game from those that were hunting. I also had my K-bar heavy bowie knife and a steel-bladed spear. And to answer the question, no, I wasn't going to be lugging all of this around on a hike. My plan was to camp for 5 to 7 days in a camper I had recently finished putting together. This gave me a day or two before to pack and prepare, and a day or two after to recoup from my adventure. The trip would consist mostly of hanging out in one area. I'd set up a main campsite off of one of the lesser used trails, right alongside the river, that my vehicle could travel down. After a day there, I would leave my base camp, hike out a few miles deeper into the forest with my AR, pistol, the spear and my kit to stay overnight, and then come back for some relaxation, pleasure shooting, and generally enjoying the wilderness. Now this isn't by any stretch a tough outing, compared to most of the more rugged outdoorsmen, moving for the weekend as someone once put it. But for me, it was more than I had done before, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could hack it. The first day went by without anything out of the ordinary happening. I established a campsite in a small clearing on the edge of the river. As I had planned, cut and stacked wood for a fire once I had returned from the overnight hike, and set up my 7x8 foot camper, this being its maiden voyage. I had 2 weeks worth of dried and canned food stowed away in sealed containers in case a hungry raider came sniffing around, as well as several cases of water. It was late afternoon at this point, and so I started preparing supper. I kicked back in my camping chair and watched the dark water of the river flow by. I had seen a fish break the surface now and then, watched a squirrel scurry about making his own preparations for winter. I even caught a glimpse of a big buck slowly making its way down a game trail on the other side of the river. Part of me regretted not getting game tags and making this a hunting trip, since this was the biggest buck I'd ever seen. Alas, it was just as nice to see it and take a couple of pictures for proof. It was getting pretty dark, and the only light now coming from the small fire I had made. I decided I'd better turn in for the night, as early as it was at the time, since I was going to be getting up early to better prepare camp. After cleaning up any food and locking up my car as well as putting out the fire, I was ready for bed, and it didn't take me long to get to sleep. It must have been around 3 a.m. when I woke up to a strange sound. No, the lack of sound that was the strange part. It was dead quiet. I hadn't closed the thick inner door to allow fresh, cool night air in while I slept. This also let me fall asleep to the sounds of the forest. The silence was what woke me, and I sat up groggily and peeked out of the screen of the camper door. I knew that when things got quiet, there had to be a predator around. The area was lit up under the moon, but I couldn't see anything of note. And then something moved. A black mass slowly made its way around the edge of the clearing, hugging the tree line. It was maybe 3 or 4 feet in height, walking on all fours, and was a bit bulky from what I could tell. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest as I thought I was staring at a black bear not but a few yards from my camper. It was partly fear and partly excitement, as I'd never seen a full-grown black bear up close before. It made the huffing sniffs and walked similar to the way I'd seen them move on TV, but seeing one live, in person, while I'm miles from help, nearly made me crap my pants. I had taken proper food storage protocols, keeping camp clean and tidy, and so I was sure. It was just curious of the new smells of my car and camper. However, it wandered off, and soon the sounds of the forest returned. I shut the inner door though, and laid back down, thinking of how I'd have a hell of a story to tell the next day when I called in for a checkup. Well, somehow I managed to go back to sleep for a few hours and got up with my alarm just before dawn. My plans to stay a full day before going for the hike were kicked to the side as I was eager to get moving. Even my knee seemed to be cooperative, as it didn't hurt or even ache. Now the thought of what if I had waited comes to mind. Stepping out of the camper, I stretched and made a quick breakfast. As I sat in my chair eating, I remembered the bear I'd seen the night before. And once I'd finished eating, took out my phone and took pictures of the tracks as proof. That's when I saw I had almost no signal. Something I hadn't thought of before, since I'd always had signal at other campsites that were on the property. Maybe I was just out of range, I thought to myself as I sent a text letting everyone know I was okay, despite seeing a bear the night before, and would send pictures when I could. I knew it would take a while to send, but it didn't matter much. I made my way over to where I'd seen the animal walk by and pulled up the camera on my phone. When I found the tracks, my brow furrowed. These weren't bear tracks, as I'd seen bear tracks before. No, these were canine tracks. Big canine tracks. Eastern NC does have red wolves, but the animal I'd seen was no wolf. It was too big, much too big to be a wolf. My blood ran cold as I tried to think of a rational reason for the size of these tracks. I mean, they were almost as big as my own boot prints. Instantly, I thought of some giant wolf-like creature was out here with me. I almost packed up camp right there and then, but another thought hit me. This was a prank. Yeah, it had to be. I was always open about the fact that I believe most, if not all, of the creatures and cryptids did in fact exist. Someone, most likely my older brother, had put on a good show and made these tracks with some bootcast attachment, just to mess with me. Yeah. I rolled my eyes, settling on this being the best case, and sent another text. Haha, very funny. You had me for a minute there, you arse. I then put my phone away, I gathered my things and locked down the camper and car as best I could and let the memory fall to the back of my mind as I started off into the forest, having no clue about the hell that I was about to go through, because, after all, it can't happen to me. The hike, the howl, and the eyes. I was probably half a mile, maybe more, from base camp when I realised something. I had forgotten my spear, which made me curse under my breath. Why had I brought the spear in the first place? Bears, of course, or any other predator I'd need to defend myself against. I'm not saying I had the fortitude it would take to stand off with a bear, or whatever, with nothing but a spear. It was a last resort if the sound of a gun didn't scare it off, or kill it if I had to shoot. Figuring I'd be okay without it, and not wanting to backtrack, I continued on. My knee was still holding up, and I didn't want to put the extra distance on it in case I had a flare-up. And so I let it go and went back to focusing on my surroundings. The fall leaves made the forest glow in a fiery orange, a few residual splotches of green here and there from the trees that refused to surrender their winter slumber. Naturally, it wasn't as noisy as it was at night, but there were birds chirping away and squirrels skittering about. I even caught sight of a small herd of deer across the river, freezing in my place so I wouldn't spook them off. I smiled, taking a moment to admire them from afar, only raising my rifle to get a better look through the scope. I saw the same buck as the day before, and it was tempting to take a shot at it. I mean, who would know this far out, and the meat would be good eating for the rest of my trip. I thought better of it though, since it was against my moral fibre to do such a thing. I lowered my rifle and started to turn, when a flash of black zipped by and a doe vanished. The commotion sent the rest of the herd bolting as screams and growls echoed off the walls of the river bank. It was a horrible sound as the doe seemed to plead for mercy only to fall silent after a loud splotching noise, presumably having its throat torn out. I stared, wide-eyed as I scanned the area, looking for where the doe had been carried off to. The rustling of the brush gave me a place to focus on, and I waited to see if anything showed itself. But whatever it was content in staying hidden as it devoured its meal. As exhilarating and somewhat frightening as this had been, I took solace in that whatever it was, it just fed. And so, it probably wouldn't be out looking for more food. I slowly started off again, keeping quiet so not to draw attention to myself. Once I was sure I was out of earshot, I returned to my regular pace and decided to go a bit further than originally planned, just to put some extra distance between me and the beast that ate the doe. After a couple more hours of walking, my knee decided it had had enough for the day, and so I began looking for a good spot to hold up for the night and settled on a small clearing about half the size of base. Toughing it out a little bit longer, I began preparing for my overnight stay, and with the ground clear of debris and a decent stack of wood gathered, I made a small fire and set up my hammock. Giving it a test sit, I bared my full weight on what was to be my bed. It held, so I remained there to give my knees some time to stop throbbing so badly. Once it had calmed down a bit, I gathered some more wood, built up a fire and boiled some water for some mac and cheese. This was to go with a pre-made sandwich and a bottle of water. After this late lunch or early supper, I checked my phone to see that I had no service. I was annoyed, though not surprised that my last text hadn't even been sent. This was the price you paid for going out into the deep woods, where coverage was limited. Not wanting to waste battery power, I put it away in my pack, sat on a stump and poked at the fire for a while as the sun fell. I took out a small snack to tie me off until morning and started mentally preparing myself for bed. I built the fire up a bit more, setting the bigger logs so that they would feed the fire without me having to get up. I left the stump I was sitting on for use in the morning and settled into my hammock. My phone buzzed twice, having turned it on vibrate earlier in the day, and I saw that I had a new text message. Mine had finally sent, and my brother, having better signal where he was, had replied. What? What are you talking about? Truck's down, so we haven't made it out yet. My brow raised at this, and I scoffed. Yeah, right. One of y'all snuck out to my camp last night, He tried to scare me. Where'd you get the giant wolf track attachment for your shoes? I replied, seeing that I had a couple of bars as long as I stayed still. My phone buzzed again. Wolf tracks? What are you talking about? Like I said, the truck is down, so I've been here for the last couple of days trying to fix it before I have to go to work tomorrow, he replied. I had barely finished reading it when he sent me a pic of his truck. The hood was up and the motor was all but taken apart from the look of it. It was then that the night was silenced by a long drawn-out howl. My eyes went wide as they could, and goosebumps crept over my whole body. I dropped my phone as I jumped at the same time and scrambled to pick it back up before the signal cut out again. Too late. The bars dropped off, and no matter how I held it, they wouldn't come back. My mind was split in two at this moment. Part of it was trying to get the phone to work again. The other part was trying to figure out what I had just heard. It wasn't the yipping yowl of coyotes. No. This was a wolf howl. And worse yet, it had sounded close. Had it been a wolf that had took the deer earlier? One wouldn't be that bad, since it had most likely run off at the sound of a rifle. And the .556 rounds that I had surely could kill it if I had no choice but to shoot. However, a pack, that would be another story. It howled again, though it hadn't seemed to move from its previous position. The sound, it echoed around me, reverberating off the wall of trees for what seemed like an eternity. Really, it was probably only a few seconds. As it faded, I remained as silent as the rest of the forest, the crackling fire being the only thing that I could hear, along with the pounding of my heart. There was no reply, which made me glad and sad. This poor creature was all alone out here, not the way a wolf is meant to live. I felt sorry for it, even though it could potentially kill me. Especially if it was the same thing that had visited my previous camp. I had accepted by this point that it had been not a prank, but a very large wolf that I'd seen, and while I was terrified, I kinda wanted to see it. Thinking back on it now, I really was a dumbass. The forest came alive once more, crickets, frogs and such, and with their return my heart slowed with ease that I hadn't expected. And with another deep breath, I closed my eyes again. Sleep came quickly, and it was quite restful considering what I'd just experienced. I shifted a little to get more comfortable, my eyes cracking open a little as I did. I had to force myself not to flinch as I thought I had seen a pair of eyes looking at me from across the camp. They'd shone bright green and yellow as the flames danced and reflected off them. The same huffing sniffs as the first night could be heard over the crackling of the fire. I thumbed the safety, hoping it would switch to fire without a sound. I was in luck, but if I had to drop the slide, it was sure to make a sound. I slowly opened my eyes a bit, and it was still there, its form hidden in shadow, but its eyes and the plumes of vapour made as it breathed in the cold night air, giving away its position. I wasn't sure what to do, though I hoped it would just go away on its own. When it noticed me looking at it, it let out a low growl. I could barely hear it over the pounding of my heart, but it sounded like more of a warning than a threat. I raised the rifle and dropped the slide with an audible clank, pointing in its direction. "Leave! Go on now! Get!" I shouted and I swore. It laughed. I aimed down into the fire and squeezed the trigger. I'm not sure if it was the rapport of the rifle or the fact that I sent smouldering embers scattering into its direction, but it did, in fact, leave. I got up and shouldered my weapon, ready in case it came back, but there was nothing. I stamped out the embers I could see, so as not to spark a forest fire. I got out my flashlight and shone it around once, twice, and more, but there was still nothing. I went over to where it had been standing and looked around, nearly pissing myself when I saw the same tracks as before. I looked to where I'd seen the eyes, gauging its head height at no less than 4.5 feet off the ground. Definitely not a red wolf, and most likely not a bear. I'm going to be fully honest here. Whereas I had almost pissed myself before, I actually did now. I hadn't thought of it before, but where there had been silence during my encounter, now there were crickets chirping and an owl hooted somewhere close by. Maybe it had gone far away. Psh, I wasn't taking the chance. I packed up camp right then and there, but knew better than to go off into the night. Instead, I tossed on a few more logs and checked my phone. I huffed when I saw it was only 2 a.m. and I still had no signal. Fuck, I said out loud, putting the phone away. I built 2 more fires near the edge of the clearing and sat on the stump right in the middle. I'd watch one way for a while, keeping my head on the swivel and switching directions every so often. This was going to be a long night. The feeling of being hunted. By the time the sun had come up, my eyes were heavy but remained wide and active. The sounds of the forest came and went all through the night, as well as the sniffing or huffing of the beast. It was as if it was probing my defences, or lack thereof, or doing it simply for the entertainment of scaring me over and over again. And once the sun had risen enough for me to see a good ways off, I put out the fires and started back to the way I had come the day before. I tried my best to double time, but that meant straining my knee more than usual, which meant the pain would return quicker. Ignoring it was easy, since I had other things to worry about. The plan was to get back to base camp, jump in my car and haul ass. This meant leaving a camper and everything within, but I could come back for it later, once I had more people. It was a good thing I had stuck to following the river, making it really hard to get lost. All I had to do was keep the water to the opposite side as the day before, and then within a few hours I'd be back and on my way out of here. Even though I could hear the birds and other creatures stirring about as they got started for the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something jump from behind one tree or bush to another, and I could only assume it was my late-night visitor. I never stopped though, figuring if I did, it might seize the opportunity to strike. I could only imagine that this is how prey animal felt when it was being chased. I turned just in time to see a mass of fur and fang charging straight at me. It wasn't waiting for me to stop. I turned, took aim and fired. Bang, bang, bang! 3 quick shots. The first shot was dead on, striking it on its left side, but the other 2 were high, as its front leg buckled for a moment. It closed the remainder of the distance with a leap and paws that looked more like hands, outstretched with a mouth wide open. My dumb luck kicked in and I tripped over a root, falling just under its grasp. The momentum of its jump sent it over the edge of a high bank and into the black water beyond. I sprang to my feet and took off, not waiting to see if it was climbing back up or not. I could hear it growling and barking in frustration as it splashed into the water. Glancing back, I almost laughed as it leapt from the water and clung to the near vertical wall of the river bank, only for the dirt and roots to give way and send it back into the drink. I wasn't completely lucky though. When I had tripped over the root, I landed on my bad knee. Jolted it hard, but in the moment I hadn't noticed. Now it was hurting and my limp made progress slow. Still, I managed to make it back to camp, and hadn't heard from my furry friend since I stopped, hearing it struggle to free itself from the river. There was something wrong with the camper. I was looking out the roof vent, which meant it had been pushed over. Besides being flipped onto its side, it was relatively intact. I turned to my car, hoping it had fared better, but it had not. All of the tyres were slashed and the hood was peeled back like a tin can. Looking over the motor, I scoffed as I knew there was no hope for it. If it had just been the tyres, I could have drove it out. Rims be damned. My knee was throbbing and I knew it didn't have much left to give me in the way of walking out of the woods. I checked my phone again to see if maybe, by some miracle, I had enough signal to call for help. I broke down in a sob as I read, "No service." A howl let out some ways back and I jumped, spinning around and falling on my ass. I scrambled to my feet and shouldered my rifle, looking back the way I had just come from. There, about 60 yards away, it stood, but not on all fours as I'd seen it before, but upright on its hind legs. Werewolf, I said to myself, later correcting myself as Dogman once I'd done some research. It was about 7 to 8 feet tall, and its dark brown and black fur was still wet from its bath. At this point, I knew that I had just one choice. I had used up flight. It was time to fight. Fight for survival. I dropped to one knee, my good one, to better study my aim, and unleashed fury. I fired a few rounds, strafing its torso and then re-aiming. When the first mag was empty, I slapped in the second, and in no time at all, I was reaching for the third. The pouch it was supposed to be in was empty. Probably had fallen out when I tripped before. To my surprise, it was still standing there. Just standing there. It looked down at its chest and brushed it with the back of its clawed hand like one would shoo away a bug. I doubt I hit it with every round, but the ones that had hit it had done nothing more than be a minor irritant. It held out its arms and cocked its head to the side. It was a stance that said, "Is that all you got?" My gaze narrowed and I looked to the camper. The door was hanging open, so without looking away from the monster before me, I reached inside until I felt the stock of my Mosin and the shaft of my spear. I slid both out but picked up the rifle first, leaving my AR resting against the wall, and stepped back over to where I had a clear shot. "You want more?" I yelled and checked that the chamber had a round in it. I lifted the heavy weapon, I aimed for the mouth and fired, hoping to wipe that grin, yes, grin, off its face. The rifle bucked as the round flew down range and struck it right between the eyes. And since I hadn't accounted for bullet climb, its eyes went wide as it yelped and stumbled back, grabbing its forehead. The steel core round had done something, at least. It looked up at me with hatred and anger that I had managed to hurt it. Quickly, I chambered around and fired. As I did, it dropped to all fours and the shot went high. It sprinted towards me, and I sent another round to meet it, buckling its right arm and making it stumble, but nothing more. I didn't have time for another round, as it was almost on me, and so I stood and swung the rifle like a club, up and over my shoulder, and bringing it down just in time to catch it on top of the head. The butt of the rifle shattered on impact, but it did its share of damage as the beast dropped and rolled, knocking my legs from under me and sending me arse over head in the other direction. It got to all fours as I rolled to my knees and scrambled to draw my pistol. Now, at point-blank range, I fired it, trying to hit it in the eyes, if for nothing else but to blind it. It yipped and yelped when I made a sensitive hit, but otherwise I wasn't having much luck since it was shaking its head. I assume it was still dazed from the clubbing, which gave me time to empty my Beretta. There was a fire in my side now as I looked down and saw red. Apparently, it had caught me with a claw in our roll, but it wasn't a major wound and there was no real pain yet, just heat. With the pistol empty, I reached for my bowie. Gone! Shit! I exclaimed as I tried to think of what to do next. The wolf looked at me now, having gotten over most of the dizziness, and snarled. It was covered in blood, but it was its own, as it had yet to tear into me. I breathed heavily as we circled each other, me stepping towards the camper and it following my steps. It swiped but missed, snapped but it was wide. I noticed one of its eyes had been damaged and the other was coated in blood. My foot was hit with something and I glanced down. My spear! With a grin I picked it up and unsheathed the foot-long blade with a nice shing and pointed it at the wolf. "Don't suppose you want to call it a draw?" I asked, not knowing if it understood me or not, but if it turned and ran, I'd let it. It snorted and whipped its head to the side and back, growling and turning to advance on me. I backed up straight now, edging closer to the bank. Like the place it had gone over before, there was a steep drop into deep water. I hoped that I could send it in there again, giving me time to breathe and make a better strategy, or in the least put some distance between me and it. It saw this and stopped its advance, narrowing one of its good eyes at me, and then rose to its full height again. It raised its head and let out a howl. Big mistake. I charged forward and jabbed hard with the spear, the blade piercing through its skin and gliding between its ribs as I gave it a little twist. The howl turned to a yelp and a snarl as it hit me hard, sending me flying as I slammed into the front wall of my camper. This knocked the breath out of me and left me with 4 slashes across my stomach and chest, turning the front of my ragged shirt a darker colour. As I tried to catch my breath, I saw it stumbling a little, the spear still stuck in its side. It seemed to be having trouble breathing now, and it grabbed the shaft and yanked it out. I grinned and coughed as I saw the blade had remained in a wound, catching on the rib cage and allowing the pole to be moved since I had never permanently fastened it on with screws it came with. The hole in the spearhead allowed blood to flow freely, and the sharp edges doing even more damage each time it tried to take a breath. It stumbled again, gasping, and then dropping to all fours, crawling away towards the river. I doubt it even knew which way it was going, as it toppled over the edge and rolled into the water with a splash. I got to my feet and walked over to where it had fallen in, but I didn't see anything other than the water settling back into its normal pace. I made my way back over to my camper, climbed inside with a spear shaft, my AR and pistol, reloading them just in case. I sat against the back wall with my guns and a bottle of water, looking at my phone, which, for whatever reason, had full bars. I rolled my eyes and scoffed before dialing my brother's number and telling him I needed help. That was the last thing I remember until I woke up in hospital a few days later, bandaged from the head to toe, as I had all manner of cuts and bruises. They said I'd been attacked by a bear and was lucky to be alive, but I knew better. I also knew better than to try and convince them otherwise, lest I might meet the guys in white coats. I healed over the coming weeks and found out that my brother had repaired my car and brought it and my camper home. He told me he had found my lost mag and bowie, but hadn't seen my spear blade. It didn't matter though, as I could order a new one. The following year, I returned to the campsite where I had nearly lost my life in a battle with a Dogman. Through what I had gathered, it was a young and rambunctious one, and was mostly toying with me. That had been its downfall. Had it been older or more experienced, I wouldn't be here to write this, yet here I am. As I looked around the area, something caught my eye and made me raise a brow. Jammed in a tree at the river's edge was my spear blade. In the distance, I heard a howl. Wow, absolutely riveting, awesome stuff there. Thank you so much to the author, Mr. James Williams. Thank you for submitting that to myself. I hope you enjoyed my rendition. Guys and girls, you know the drill. Please do let me know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. I hope you're all well and happy. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.